Hello and welcome back to the Little Craft House. If we haven't met before, my name is Nicole and I like to show you guys how to make polymer clay earrings. So today's technique is super simple, one of my most favorite techniques for using colors that coordinate together, but I'm not quite sure what I want to do with it. So this is the technique. It's really fun and simple and easy to do. So yeah, follow along with me today and we're going to make this pair of earrings and another little pair as well. Okay, so last week we created this beautiful colour palette. So if you would like the recipes to these colours, skip back to last week's tutorial because you'll be able to see how I made each of these. Very simple recipes and yeah, create some beautiful colours. Now in that recipe I spoke about how it would be nice to mix these with some ivory, being warmish colours, that the ivory would match in quite nicely. So I have some here and that is what we're going to do today. We're going to add that to the colour palette as well. Right, so I'm just going to move these colours to the side to give myself some working space and so that you guys can still see those colours. And I'm just going to grab myself some of the ivory here. So this ivory is the Souffle brand. So I like to use Sculpey Souffle and Sculpey Primo probably the most in my creations. They're both really good quality clays and they create a really good quality finish once done. In saying that, we do need to condition up our clays first, so I've just done some thin slices here of the ivory, giving it a little bit of a roll with my acrylic roller first, and then we're going to pop it through the pasta machine. Now the reason we do this is we just need to make sure that it is nice and soft and workable to use, because sometimes straight out of the packet the clays can be a little crumbly or they're just not quite ready to use. So we just condition them up a bit first, get them all soft and workable. And one thing to remember when using your pasta machine is you don't want to pop through a big chunk of clay. So I'm just bringing it down in size first before using the machine. So I'm just going to run the clay through the machine a couple of times first, and then we're going to start bringing it down in size because we're going to try and make this piece a really nice thin piece. But again, we don't want to go straight down into that thin size because we don't want to put too much stress on the gears. And always, as always, when we fold it in half, we're going to put that seam line down the side, and that's going to push out any of the air that may get trapped in there. Right, and then I'm going to bring my machine down to the thinnest setting now, and then I'm going to pass that through. And that's made it super long. Let's put a bit of a crease in it, but that's okay. And it is quite thin. Right, so with our other colours, we are going to get them all rolled up, and we want to roll them into little colour tubes. Can you hear that noise? Let me show you. Right, sorry, back to it. So we're going to make each of these colours into a tubular shape. So I'm just folding and squeezing them so that we're not getting any trapped air in them. So we just sort of fold and squeeze to start with before we do the actual rolling part of it. So just, yeah, squeezing them as much as I can. We don't want any trapped air in there, otherwise we end up with holes in our design afterwards. Okay, so I'll just speed this up a little bit because I'm just going to do it with each of the colours here. And for this design, it doesn't matter if you have uneven amounts of each of the clays. It actually looks better when you have more of one colour and less of another. Okay, so now I'm going to grab my little acrylic plate. So this is super handy tool to have. If you don't have one, you can use sometimes those rulers come thicker, or a lid to a container, and we're just going to use this to roll them out. So I am doing a little bit more squishing and squeezing there because I've realized that the color wasn't quite bonded nicely together and it had some gaps in it. So by using the acrylic plate, it's making that tubular shape nice and even, and I'm applying a bit of pressure, which is also just closing up the seam lines on the sides. Now obviously you can use your hands. The only downside to using your hands is that you tend to get the little bumps where your fingers are, so it's not necessarily even. But if that doesn't bother you, then that's not an issue, just use your hands. But I like to use my acrylic plate. I'm also just squeezing in the ends here just so that they're a little bit neater as well. Right, now they're all nicely rolled, I think I'm going to chop this one down a little bit, just because I don't want the neutral colours to feature too much on this earring, if you know what I mean. So because we're going to be wrapping each of these in the ivory, I'm just going to make this piece here a little bit thinner. It's not going to make too much of a difference because I didn't take too much off, but I just want to make it a little bit thinner so that it's not too prominent of a colour within this colour range. I'll move this pretty little rainbow of colours to the side now, give us a bit of working space. I'm going to bring over my piece of ivory so that's nice and thin, and I'm just going to chop off that edge piece just so that it's a nice straight end. I'm not going to worry too much about those edges, but I will take this top one off because that was kind of ratty. Oh, I'm taking them all off. Okay, I didn't realise I was taking them all off. We're taking them all off. Right, it doesn't matter if you leave them ratty. We're going to chop the ends anyway. So we're going to roll up our colours now in this. So we want to make sure that the ivory is touching nicely all the way around these colours, because again, if that's not touching, it's going to create an air bubble and that's going to be visible afterwards. So I'm going to, I didn't cut that too well. It's a little bit of a gap, but that's okay because we're going to stack them on top of each other. So it really doesn't matter if there is a little bit of a gap. Yeah, it'll fix itself afterwards. And so we're just going to do each one of these, and yeah, just smoothing it down as you put that outer clay on. I overcompensated that time and I've cut too much clay. That's all right, we're just going to smooth it down. And so we're just going to wrap each of these colours up. So I've just put it into fast mode because you don't need to see me doing it in real time. I'm just using my hands just to roll them a little bit more, just to stretch them out a bit more, just so that it fits on that piece of base clay nicely, because they were a little bit short. So I just wanted to stretch them out a bit. And as usual, I'm running out. So this happens every time I do this technique. I think I've cut enough clay, but I haven't. So I'll have to just grab some more. The marvels of editing there. So I grabbed some more, popped it through the machine so that's nice and thin as well, and we're just going to wrap this last colour up. So now I'm going to get my acrylic roller, acrylic tile back again, and I'm just going to roll over the top of each of these. Now, as I roll it, I am just stretching them all just slightly, and what it's going to do is thin out that bit of ivory as well. So we're just making the whole thing a little bit thinner. It's helping to bond that ivory clay to the colour clay, and it's also helping to close up that seal. So as you can see there, there's a little air bubble in it, but this is what each of the pieces is going to look like. It's going to have the coloured circle with that border on the outside. So I'm just going to cut off all those little ratty-tatty end bits. Now we can see the colours properly. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time now organising these colours, making sure that similar colours aren't on top of each other. And yeah, just organizing them in a way that I like. So usually I'll try and do 6 colors so that we can stack them in a triangle. Sometimes I'll do 6 or 9, sorry, my maths, 6 or 9 colors so that we can make them into a rectangle. I'm trying the triangle here, but I've got an extra color. So just trying to work out a way that I can put them all together, have the colors in a nice order, and have it easily tileable once we cut our slices. So that's why I'm playing around a little bit. I worked on it for a little while, and then I just decided to go with a bit of a circular pattern. Now, you may have heard this technique referred to as a cane, and that means that it is the same pattern throughout the whole piece. So I'm going to refer to it now as a cane. So with this cane, we're going to slice and tile. So when we do these, this technique, circles aren't the best, mainly because when you put 2 next to each other, you end up with gaps, and then you've got to try and fill those gaps, and it can be a bit awkward, and it's not as easy and as simple as you want it to be. So I'm going to start off by rolling it as a circle, but then we're going to squish it down to make it more into a rectangular shape. So you can see there that the gaps are starting to slowly close up a little bit. By now putting pressure on the 4, or making 4 sides, putting pressure on it, it's going to close those gaps within. So each of those circles are no longer going to stay as circles, and that is completely fine. I actually prefer them to be a bit of an irregular circle anyway. So doing them as circles to start with is just the easiest way, and then now they're going to change their shapes slightly. So I'm just going to continue going around and around on all 4 sides, adding pressure, squishing it down, because I want to, again, remove any of those air bubbles that are in there and close off any of the gaps. There you go. You can see there that the gaps have now disappeared that were in there originally. So I'm just grabbing my knife here, and we're just going to cut it in half. So as you can see there, that pattern is kind of big still. So I'm going to now start reducing the rest of what's left of the cane. So I'm going to do this by using my hands. I could use that acrylic plate, but I do find it quicker to use my hands to do this. So I'm just squeezing and pulling and just applying. I'm trying to apply an even amount of pressure to it. This should keep the shapes in the same positioning and the same form without distorting them too much. Might distort a little bit, but for this pattern it really doesn't matter. I am using the acrylic plate just to even it back out, and then as I reduce down, I go back to using my hands. Now this is a bit of a slow process, and you just got to take your time with it, just stretching and pulling. So I think I might speed this up a little bit. Right, so if I chop the end piece off, you can now see that it has gone smaller. So again, I'm just going to cut in half so that we've got a piece of each of those sizes. You can see them there. And I'm going to continue to reduce the remainder down again. So we're going to make it smaller again. So just same technique, squeezing and pulling until I get it down a little bit smaller than that. There we go, a little bit smaller. That's the 3 sizes so far. And I think I shall chop it in half again, and we'll go one more time. So just for fun, just to make it a bit smaller. I don't want to go too tiny, but we do want to make it a little bit smaller again. There we go, and look how cute it is. It's tiny. Right, so I've got my 4 different sizes now, and so we're able to slice these up to then tile them. So we're just going to do these one at a time. Again, just going to take my knife. I'm using my flexi blade. Usually I like to use the stiffer blade because it helps to keep the pieces more even. You'll also notice that my nail colour has changed. It is now, what is it, 3 days later. I had to finish up the other day. So yeah, 3 days later, I've come back to them. Now, the good thing about leaving these for a couple of days is that they have firmed up a little. So after all of that stretching and pulling and maneuvering them the other day, they were quite soft. So by leaving them for these couple of days, I mean, I did have to leave them because I had stuff to do, but by leaving them, even if you were able to leave them overnight, it just helps them to firm up a little bit. So when we slice them like this, they're not squishing and going out of proportion. If you find that they are quite soft, or if the weather is warm and that's affecting it, just chuck them in the fridge for a few minutes and that'll help to cool down the clay, and then you can continue like normal. Another thing that you could do if it was squishing a little bit as you were slicing is to do a slice like normal and then just flip the cane to the other side and then do a slice, and just keep doing that so that way it squishes down kind of even if you're having those squishing difficulties. And just as we're slicing here, it's important not to slice them too thick. So these little ones I did slice a little bit too thick by the looks of it here. But yeah, we want to try and keep them kind of thin because we are putting them on a backing piece. So if we cut them too thick, their final earrings are going to be too thick unless we roll them down quite a bit, which will distort the shapes that we've made. Right, so that is a pretty little bunch of colours. I've grabbed some clay here. It's a bit dirty. My pasta machine wasn't cleaned properly, so it's got dirt on it, but that's okay. We are going to do dirty side up so that we cover the dirty side. The underneath is quite clean, so we don't have to worry about that. And yeah, we're just going to tile on to that dirty side. No one will know the difference. See, the base is clean. And that'll teach me to check the pasta machine before I go and put a light colour in. Right, so onto tiling it. So I want this to be nice and random. I don't really want the same colours touching, so I'm going to try and avoid that. I want to have a combination of the bigger circles and smaller circles and different colours. So yeah, let's just have a play around with tiling. If I was a more organised person, I would have worked out some sort of pattern to follow, or I would have stacked the canes together before slicing, and then I could have just sliced them and tiled them like that. But this is going to be more random, which makes it more fun and more interesting. So yeah, let me just play around and work out how I'm going to do this pattern. Right, that is looking awesome. I'm so happy with how that has turned out. It looks all nice and bubbly. Very cool. Right, just chucking in those last couple of bits so that we don't waste them. A bit at the top there, and there we go. Now you can see that there is still a couple of little gaps which I hope should close up once we roll it down, and you can also see there's a couple of little dirty bits. So I'm grabbing my isopropyl alcohol here, and this is going to help us to clean the clay. So the isopropyl and a little cotton dip, and then just soaking one end of it, and then I'm going to use that to help me get off some of the little dirty bits that have gotten onto the clay. So the camera's pulled back a little bit far here, but there's a couple of little hairs, just little fibrous hairs that have stuck to the clay. All right, let's zoom it in. Might help to see it a little bit better. You can also see on the orange there, most of the orange pieces have a little black dot. That's actually an air bubble that was within that clay. So I didn't squeeze out the air properly. So again, once we roll the clay down to help bond it all back together, then hopefully those little dents, little air bubbles, they should close up. That should be fine. But we just want to get this clay cleaned at the moment. If we leave any of these little dirty bits on and then use our roller and roll it down, it's going to push them further into the clay, and it's just going to be really difficult then to remove. So I'm just going to try and do as much as I can now before we add the rolling, well, before we do the rolling element to it. Yeah, just get it all nicely cleaned off. Oh, and I forgot to share my little tip here that I put the isopropyl on one end of the cotton tip, which I then use to apply onto the clay, and that should help to remove any of the lint or particles. And then I use the dry end to dry up any of the wet isopropyl that is left. Next, we are going to pop on a piece of baking paper to help us roll this down and flatten it out. So I do the baking paper because it helps to stop any of those smaller bits of clay grabbing onto the rolling pin and moving during this process. You can also see through the baking paper, so I can see what's happening still, and it's also helping to not put any more lint or dirt or muck onto that clay that I've just cleaned. So I'm applying pressure here, so I do apologise for the camera shaking. It's pressure onto the table which is shaking my camera, but yeah, I'm just applying some pressure to close up those gaps, so squishing the clay out a little bit, also helping to reduce the clay's thickness as well, because it is a little bit thicker because I've layered it onto that base piece of clay. So when I'm pretty much happy, I'm going to have a look, but I can still see that there's a few gaps there, and some of those orange pieces hasn't closed those little gaps on those either. So a bit more pressure and a bit more rolling. Actually, I'm not really rolling here, I'm more rubbing just to try and close up those bits. Now, if you find that the baking paper is actually stopping it from rolling down too much, you can take the paper off and then just use the roller directly on once it has started to bond and you've passed the point of those little pieces lifting up. Yes, that is looking so much better now. It is nice and clean and it's all squished together with no gaps. So I'm just going to cut off those scrappy edge bits just to make it look much neater now. I mean, really, you don't have to, just more for the aesthetics of the video, I suppose, just removing those bits. I am able to reuse those scrap pieces though. Probably, I don't know, I'll find something to do with those dirty bits. I'll probably just blend it back through and it'll be fine. Right, so it's coming now to the cutting stage. So I decided to use this cutter. It's an old one that I have in my collection, but I think it's wide enough that it's going to be able to get enough of different sizes, lots of colours. Yeah, it was a bit tricky to choose a cutter today. Actually, it's always hard to choose cutters. It's one of the things that just stresses me out the most about making. I really enjoy the making process, but once I get down to choosing a cutter, I find there's a lot of pressure. If you don't choose the right one, it doesn't showcase your design as well. But anyway, I chose this one. I'm going to cut a few pieces out of it so that I can do I've got a couple of ideas to do with this one. So I cut 2 pairs out. I show one idea here today and I'm going to work on the other one because it's a little bit more involved. But yeah, just going to cut these out. And then once I've done these ones, let me catch up first. And so the 2 pairs of those. And then I also thought I would just do some long ones as well. This long rectangle is definitely a really classic style that I really wear a lot of. So I'm going to make sure that I do a pair of those today. And as usual, I don't like to waste clay, so I will be cutting out a bunch of studs as well. I would have really loved to have gotten this topper used as well, because I think that using that as a topper and then just a plain piece of clay or even wood underneath would have looked really nice. But I didn't think about that whilst I was cutting those other pieces and it didn't fit. So I'm just going to cut a bunch of studs here. Some will be used as stud toppers for other designs, and also the smaller ones in my just either as stud packs or little freebies for customers as well. So that's a good way to use up some of the scrap clay. And in just a moment, I'm going to show you another way to use up what is left. So I'm just going to make sure that I cut out as many pieces of usable studs and usable bits that I can. Now I'm going to do my little glamorous pull. So sometimes when you pull the clay, it all comes off nicely in one go and it looks all beautiful, but did not work for me today. It's all coming off in little chunky bits. It doesn't matter, it's all getting there in the end. But yeah, let's just get each of those little bits off and out. You can see all the pieces that I've cut. And then I'm going to transfer these on to my baking tray and bake in the oven. So I'm going to do it at 130 degrees for 45 minutes because it is all primo and souffle clay. I'll check on them, make sure that they're baked enough, and then I shall bring them back for us to assemble. Right, so time to use up all of those little scraps that were left. Now, I could just have blended this all together and created a new colour. It may be ugly, it may be nice, I'm not sure yet. We're going to do this first, and then with the scraps from this, they can then be blended. So we are just reducing the amount of waste completely and creating lots of new and unique different pieces. So each one of those scrap pieces was stacked on top of each other with the colour facing upwards. And I'm just getting my acrylic plate and we're just squishing it to remove any gaps that were inside of it and get rid of any of those air bubbles. Squishing it down on every side so that it's a nice squarish, rectangularish shape. And then I'm going to grab my knife and do some slicing. So I'm going to go this side actually. And we're just going to slice up a bunch of pieces. And this is definitely unique. You could never replicate this again if you wanted to. Not in this colour combination and exact pieces anyway. Right, just going to tile them together now. And don't forget, if one side doesn't look as colourful, you can flip it over and check what the other side looks like. Sometimes the back is prettier than the front. All right, I'm just going to give it a little roll down. And that's a really cute little slab that I can cut some more pieces out of. So back to our original pieces now. They've come out the oven and I've already drilled the holes. I use my Dremel electric drill. I've also sanded along the edges. I do use a knife to take off any of the bigger, chunkier bits that are hanging off the side. And then I use some of this sandpaper. It's a really fine grit sandpaper. And then I can just rub that along the edges as well, just to smooth them out so that they're nice and smooth. So I've already prepped all of that. Oh, and the good thing about the little scalpel knife too, if you've got a design like these, you're able to use the knife to get down into those little corners that are really hard to get to with the sandpaper, or if you've got the sanding attachment on your drill. Sometimes you just can't get into those, so the knife comes in really handy. Now I'm wanting to match those little gold linking rings on the top of that little droplet, and then I've got the long rectangle ones I'm just going to put straight onto a ball stud earring. So with my jump rings, I'm using 8mm and I am twisting them open like that. That is my top tip for using jump rings. So if you twist them open, when you close them, you twist them back and they line up nicely. If you pull them open in the other direction, then sometimes that can distort them and it's harder to close them up. But if you just do that little twisting motion, I find it works every time. So there we go, first one done, nice and simple. And then second one. Right, so with this design, I'm going to use the 8mm jump rings again to connect the polymer clay to that nice little gold linking ring. So I did try my hardest to drill these holes in the center. So hopefully they are nice and central so that this sits right. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. And now to join that linking ring to the ball stud, I'm just going to use a smaller jump ring. So these ones are 6mm. I didn't want it to be too long and out of proportion, so I think just going down a size for jump ring to add to this top piece, I think that will definitely work better. Yeah, that's quite a cool little design. I like that. The only thing that would have made this one better is if I didn't have the backing on, and then that way you would see that design on the back and the front because there is a lot of movement in it. If I was to do it again with that shape and this design, I would definitely do that. I didn't have this shape in mind when I first started making, so I didn't think about that, but yeah. I actually quite like this little design. It moves around quite a lot, so it's got a nice lot of movement to it, which is always a nice thing to have with your earrings. So I'll just get that one finished off there and close that jump ring up. And there we go. So that's the 2 pairs of earrings done. Now, I should have mentioned as well that I didn't put any gloss coating or resin or anything like that on the top of these. I wanted to leave them just as a matte finish. So obviously if you do this yourself and you choose to put some sort of gloss coating on, go for it. But yeah, I really like the matte finish on these, especially with that shiny gold findings. I think it's a nice little match. There we go. So popping it onto some earring cards just so you guys can see them nicely. I am keeping these 2 pairs for myself though, so I will take them off the cards afterwards, but I just thought it was a little bit easier to show you guys. And so that brings me to the end of today's tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed following along with me today. And yeah, it's just a great way to use up some combinations of colours that you otherwise might not have a plan for. So yeah, thanks for joining me today, and I hope to see you again next week when I'm back with another tutorial. So I hope to see you then. Bye!